Hello, everyone. My name is Marigold, and I am a fiction writer from North America. Today's topic for the eGlobal Author Salon is What's in a POV? Cece and Amelia, would you please introduce yourselves?
Go ahead, Amelia.
Did you tell me to go ahead?
Sure did.
Okay, no problem. My name is Amelia Blue. I am a poet from Texas, and I'm currently working on a novel, and I'm trying to decide on the point of view.
Thank you, Amelia. I'm CC, also known as Word Spinner, from the AI Writer Connection group on Discord, and one of your co-hosts today. I'm also a writer. I think that covers it. Your turn.
Perfect. So again, today's topic is What's in a POV? Welcome to the eGlobal Creative Writing Salon. People on the outside think there's something magical about writing, that you go up in the attic at midnight and cast the bones and come down in the morning with a story. But it isn't like that. You sit back behind a typewriter, or in our case, in front of a laptop or PC screen, and you work, and that's all there is to it. Now, it's not an easy task. It is something that takes a lot of dedication and a lot of time out of your day, or weeks or months, or in some cases years, depending on the type of body of work that you are working on. Today's Writing Salon objectives: point of view. We're going to touch upon a little bit about tense, maybe a little bit about head hopping. We will talk about genre and category, and then I will leave you with a salon writing short just for fun, just to kind of test out the different POVs to see what kind of bodes with you and the stories that you're envisioning. At any time during this session, please feel free to either post a comment inside of the chat, or you can raise a hand and either CC or Word Spinner will go ahead and let me know that there is a question. Point of view. It's one of the things that many authors really struggle with when they are starting out with a brand new concept. What are you writing and why? Is it going to be first person, second, third limited, or are you going to have that third person all-knowing perspective? In first person, you see the perspective of the writer's central character. This is the individual who we are following. You will see pronouns such as I, my, me, mine, and sometimes we. With the word we, we're going to touch upon that a little bit later in the session, but I do want you to make a little mental note about the word we. Second person POV. In second person POV, you actually see the perspective of the reader being directly addressed by the writer, who uses words such as you, your, and us. Third person. When it comes to third person POV, you see the perspective of a different party, one who is neither the writer nor the reader. This is the central character, or sometimes the narrator, who uses the following words: he, him, his; she, her, hers; it or its; they, them; their, theirs. Now, when you think about your story, think about whose point of view would tell your tale better. Is it going to be from a first person perspective to get that deeper POV using those first person pronouns of I, me, or mine? Or is it going to be that third person limited with she, he, they, them, it? As the writer, that is a decision that you need to make early on, because there's nothing worse than starting a body of work, getting a third or halfway through, and then realizing, oh my gosh, I need to change this from first to third person, or from third to first. Because even though you can do that, it becomes a little bit of a chore being able to flip, because when you're flipping from a first person or third to first, that does change some of the sentence structure. So again, think about whose perspective your story would be better suited to. Is it a first person or a third? Those are the perspectives that you see most in fiction or nonfiction. Now, in third person limited, the writer is limited to a single character's head at one time. That means that if I am in my central character's head and I am using a third person perspective from a limited point of view, that means that when I am in Sally's head, that means that I can only write what I can see, hear, taste, touch. I can only use the senses that I can see or experience through Sally's head. I can't jump into Jeff's head and know what Jeff is thinking. I can't bounce around and go into Betty's head and know what Betty is thinking. I have to stay in Sally's limited perspective. Now, you will see some alternating POVs when you are writing in, especially in romance. So romance novels tend to alternate either every other chapter between the protagonist, who is your main character, and the love interest. Now, you do see that often those perspectives change every other chapter, but then there are some cases where you may see that the perspectives change between scene breaks within a single chapter. Your third person perspective of an all-knowing godlike, that is more of a narrator telling the story. When you are using that all-knowing perspective, make sure that you are balancing the information that you know with what you're putting on the page. One of the things that you have to be really careful of in this perspective is that you don't show too much too soon. So make sure that you're adding those little breadcrumbs throughout your story, but do not provide the reader with spoilers, because again, you want the reader to follow the story, but you don't want to intrude as that all-knowing perspective. And the other thing to point out here on the last point, the POV takes on more of a narrator's voice that should fade into the background. Do we have any questions at this time, Cece or Amelia?
I
Negative.
do not. Oh, I apologize, Cece.
That's okay, girl. We're going to do this probably more than once.
Thank you, ladies. Common uses of first person. So as you can see, there are multiple areas that you can use a first person perspective. As writers of fiction and nonfiction, today I'm touching more upon fiction writing. Again, when you're writing in a first person perspective, just like when you're in a third, you are in one head. You are in that one character. You can only see, hear, touch, smell, taste, or physically and emotionally feel what that character feels. You cannot jump around from head to head. Otherwise, that becomes head hopping. So if you were writing in first person perspective, and say you're going to use that same perspective from beginning to end in your book, then that means that that story is only told by that one character. So if I was writing Sally's story in first person, I would only use her perspective all the way through the book. That means that I could not know what Jeff was thinking. Now, Sally could maybe infer what Jeff is thinking, but she cannot know what Jeff thinks or feels unless Jeff actually verbalizes that thought or that feeling, or unless his body action lets her know maybe that he's angry or that he is antsy. So again, you can only be in one person's head at a time. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't have chapter 1 in Sally's perspective in first person, and then when chapter 2 comes around, I could definitely change the perspective to Jeff, but I would need to make sure that I'm introducing that perspective and that change from one perspective to another. I would need to make sure that I'm orienting my reader. So common uses for second person POV. As you can see, self-help books, advertisements, and some forms of poetry will use second person. Common uses for third person, you have quotes, journalism, and fiction and nonfiction bodies of work. Head hopping. Try to really try to avoid this. This is a topic all in itself, and there's a lot of debate over what's acceptable in the industry and what isn't. Now, if you were to read Nora Roberts, you'll see that she does tend to hop from paragraph to paragraph, but she is Nora Roberts, and her readers are used to her stylistic changes within her body of work. Fun fact, the first chapter of Harry Potter, the very first book, is actually written in that third person, all-knowing perspective. However, most of the action in the rest of the chapters of the book are actually written in Harry's limited POV. So if you get a chance, go out and take a look at that very first chapter. If you go out to Amazon and pull that up, you can actually look inside, and you can view the very first chapter, see how it's in that all-knowing narrator's perspective. But then once you flow into chapter 2, you see that you are now in Harry's POV. So in the Island of Dr. Moreau, this passage is in past tense. I do not propose to add anything to what has already been written concerning the loss of the Lady Vane. As everyone knows, she collided with the derelict when 10 days out from Cowes. The longboat with 7 of the crew was picked up 18 days after by HM gunboat Myrtle. Here in this passage, you see that first person perspective, and it is in past tense. Whether you choose to write in past or present, that is up to you as a writer, or if you've been commissioned for a piece, then of course you would stick with whatever tense you've been asked to write a body in. You will see quite a few young adult books in present tense because present tense seems to be more immediate, and that bodes really well with your teen, your young adult, as well as your tween and middle grade. Third person limited. Designer coffee lingers in the air. The sweet aroma fills Detective Maxwell's nose, teasing the senses. A kitchen must be nearby, or so he thinks to himself. Coffee, he would give his right arm for a single cup about now. Not the fancy, dry roasted double espresso stuff. No, double shifts and sleep deprivation call for the black sludge of death. So in that excerpt, you see that it is in present tense, and the character we're in Maxwell's head. We are hearing what it is that he is thinking, and we are seeing everything from his eyes. And it is told in third person with those third person pronouns. Now here's an excerpt from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in present tense with that all-knowing. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you would expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. So as you can see, the narrator is telling a story. The narrator is painting a picture, and the narrator has actually provided the reader with some form of orientation into the story. So we know exactly who the story is about, where the story is taking place, and we know who the players are. That's one of the things that's essential when you are looking to write a story. So think about your character and what POV would better suit your character. So earlier in the segment, I talked about the use of we and of course us and our. You want to avoid that hive brain. Now, does that mean that when you're writing in first person that you should always avoid the we, the us, and the our? No, but it does mean that you want to be careful. So if I'm writing in first person, my character should be using I, me, and my pronouns. There may be times when my character, when Sally might say, Cece and I went to the store, we decided that we wanted to get gummy worms for the movie tonight. Well, I can use we, but I have to be careful that we does not become my new character. My character is a single entity. My character is Sally. Cece is a supporting character, which means that if I begin to use we consistently, then I have changed the direction of my character, and I've turned my character into a hive brain. Now, again, are there times when we or us come in handy? You betcha. But make sure that you have a lot of that page time devoted to those first person POVs, those first person pronouns. Remember, your character is an individual. Do not merge your character with another person. Your character should only think as one person, singular. And again, write from that one person's perspective. What can he or she see, touch, feel, taste, hear, and feel emotionally? Past or present tense? Which one? Most fiction writers will at one time or another ask that age-old question of which tense to write in. Well, I know that I have, and there are times when I've started a story and I've gotten a couple of chapters in and I thought, I really like the flow of this in past tense, but if I'm writing a thriller or maybe I am kind of veering more toward young adult, I might want that immediacy of the moment. So I might actually switch to present tense. Think about your story and what advantage you can get from writing either in past tense or present tense. How do you know which one is right for your body of work? Let's look at some of the pros and cons. So present tense, it makes a reader feel like the events are happening right now in real time. It also gives the body that immediacy that I was talking about earlier. It is for a fast-paced body of work. So if you have a slow burn that's kind of moving really slow, you may not want to put that in a first-person perspective. Another pro, many young adult bodies are written in present tense. Another pro, if writing in present tense, if that comes natural for you and you have fewer tense issues writing in present, then write in present tense. Write in what makes that writing experience more comfortable for you and brings that character to life on the page. Con, if you feel that it will, make your story kind of feel tired or dragging on, or if you feel that writing in present tense might tire or irritate your readers because maybe the flow is a little bit more clunky, or maybe it's moving too fast, that would be a con for using present tense. Past tense, a pro, a more traditional way of writing, so it's more common to readers. A pro, it can make a reader feel more in control of the situation since the issues were already resolved. It also makes it easier to show in hindsight, some flashbacks, some time slips, some time jumps, or when taking the reader back and forth between different time frames. That can be really beneficial when you are writing a time travel. Con, if your story is fast-paced and you're using past tense, it could slow it down in some areas. So make sure that you have enough action if you're writing in past tense. And that action doesn't necessarily always have to be external action. You can also have some internal conflicts and actions going on within the character. So keep that in mind too, that you want to have a nice balance of those internal and external conflicts. Also, if you're writing in past tense and it makes you feel constrained, try writing in present tense and see if it makes the flow of your story better. A con, it can take away from the immediacy that one finds when writing in present tense. Another thing to consider is, what genre is your story in? Is it a mystery, romance, fantasy, science fiction, horror? Is it nonfiction? Are you writing for kids? Who is your audience? Within your genres, you have subgenres. And if I'm writing, say, in the mystery subgenre, if I am writing a thriller that is action-packed, I might decide that I want to write in first person, maybe third perspective, and maybe I want to alternate between my killer, my protagonist, and my love interest. Maybe I have a mentor that I want to list within my thriller. Or I could be writing a romantic mystery or even a romantic suspense under mystery. If I'm writing that, I might want to maybe alternate between my protagonist and that protagonist's love interest. I could maybe want it to be more immediate. It could be maybe in a young adult genre. And I might choose to write that in first person perspective, alternating between the main character and the love interest, and maybe alternating every other chapter. So again, think about your story and what tense and POV would better serve that body of work. Do we have any questions at this time?
Nope.
So our subgenres continued. When it comes to kid books, especially our picture books, you may find that some of those are in third, but many of them can be in first person from the main character's perspective. And because of the immediacy in some children books or middle grade books or those early chapter books, a lot of the time you can see them in both third and in first. If you want that deeper POV where you can allow the reader to be immersed in the story and experience things as that first person perspective and be able to see what your character is doing, that first person perspective might be what you want to use. If you're writing young adult, play around with third perspective or first. So there are two exercises that I always recommend for writers to play around with when they are looking at writing from first or third. I always recommend that maybe you take about 500 words of a body of work and you go in and look at that body of work. If you are writing in first person, if you want to tighten that body of work up, then you'll want to focus on those first person pronouns in that excerpt, which is I, me, or mine, and only use one or a combination of those only 2 times in that example. The point of this exercise is to imagine a narrator or central character who is less interested in him or herself than what she or he is observing. You can make your narrator or your central character someone who sees an interesting event unfolding, which she or he is either part of or not part of. It is extremely important in this exercise that you ensure your reader is not surprised 40 or 50 words into the body. You want the reader to know exactly who the main protagonist is at the opening of this excerpt. You want to orient your reader to who the character is, where the character is, and what is happening in that little excerpt scene. I do recommend that you do this, especially if you start to notice that you have a lot of filter words. Maybe you have a lot of words that say, I see, I observe, I talk, I walk. Anytime you're doing a lot of that, you are telling the reader what is happening rather than showing. So again, I will make sure that I link this in a section, and I will send something to Rebecca from eGlobal to see if she can go ahead and share that out on eGlobal's website as well. If you are a member of the AI Writers Connection, find Miracle, Amelia, or myself on AI Writers Connection Discord, and we can actually have a longer discussion about the writing exercises. Do we have any questions at this time?
No questions.
Okay. Is there anything further that somebody would like to touch upon? We have about 5 more minutes for a Q&A. If you are going to speak, be sure to unmute your mic before you do so.
I'd like to mention something I find interesting, but also a little confusing at times. Let's say you're writing a story that is in first person, but it's from a narrator's view that is outside of the actual situation that's unfolding. I've always found that interesting because it's almost... Oh, sorry, I'm actually explaining this the wrong way. Actually, no, I am explaining it the right way. And let's say they have a character in the story that is, let's say, also telling a story to children, and that character ends up telling the story in a different point of view than what the narrator's point of view is. As in, the main narrator is in, you're reading the main narrator in first person point of view, but the character in their story is telling a story to people in a third person limited or omniscient view. Does that make sense?
So that's somewhat similar to what Harry Potter did, but Harry Potter actually told the story from the narrator's perspective in third person. Now, to date, I guess I would have to kind of search and scour the internet to find something written in first person from a narrator's perspective, but with other characters in third person telling the actual story in real time, whereas the first person perspective was telling the story as a narrator. Cece, what is your thought on that?
I don't have a thought on that specifically. I have other thoughts, but we will touch on those after we finish this one.
Okay, so I'm not going to say that it can't be done, but one of the things that I want you to ask yourself, what is the benefit? What are the pros and cons of writing that narrator in first person?
That is actually a difficult question for me at the moment because I'm currently working on a novel where I'm trying to figure out a point of view. I can see a few benefits, but I can also see cons. You may want the narrator to be telling the story from a first person point of view to get their opinion I mean, I guess you could do this in limited third person as well, but you might be able to get a better idea of their thought about what is taking place in the story that is unfolding that they are telling someone, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm explaining things in a confusing manner.
So, what would be the main purpose of having the narrator? Would it be narrating the story of something similar to the movie Big Fish, where the son is talking to his father and the son is kind of narrating some content, but then it flows back into some flashbacks with it being told from the father's perspective? Are you looking to be able to use your narrator to introduce a scene and then flow right into your protagonist?
Actually, that's a lot like what I was talking about. I guess it's a lot like Big Fish in the sense that you are getting a first person point of view from the narrator who is telling someone a story in third person limited point of view. And then if it's kind of, I guess it flows into another character. The scenario that I originally presented wasn't a good example of what I was trying to explain. The better example would be the narrator. Where you get the narrator's point of view in first person, but the story the narrator's telling to people is told in third person limited or omniscient. And I find that interesting because it's kind of playing with mixing point of views while still adhering, I guess, to the main point of view of the story, if that makes sense.
So, what you have to be careful of doing when you are trying to use a format in that way is that you're not using it to just relay what a character might be thinking outside of your protagonist. So, that would be a case where I would really, really encourage you to challenge yourself to pick one POV and find out how you can tell the story from that single POV, whether it is first person or third person. By doing that, you have to set who your main character is, because remember, your narrator, from what I'm hearing, may not be your main character. Your protagonist is the person who is living the story in real time. You need to ask yourself, why do you need the narrator, and what information is there in your story that you can't get across with your protagonist? If you are telling it in first person, then everything that your protagonist sees, hears, touches, tastes, feels is all seen through that person's perspective. If there's something that a character is thinking and you don't want your first person protagonist to know what's happening there, then you could alternate between scenes within the same chapter or within every other chapter. You could alternate to show the different perspectives. But you want to be really careful to make sure that you're not jumping from one head to another, because then that can be a little difficult for an audience to read, because then they don't know whose head they're being dropped in. And plus, if you're going from one head to another just every couple of paragraphs, that can also be disruptive to the story, because you're not allowing your reader to stay in one head long enough to get to know your character.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
As far as what I was saying, I think it would be a better idea to have two characters where I tell the story in both of their point of views through first person point of view, where you have one that is the storyteller that's still central to the story. Let's say they're the father or daughter or son of the other character. And then you also have the other character's point of view in first person as well. I think that would work better. So thank you for the advice.
Oh, thank you for bringing up the different types. I really appreciate that.
You have two questions.
Okay. And is the first one, what is the difference in third person limited, where you can have alternating POVs for a protagonist and love interest and head hopping?
Yes.
Okay. In third person limited, again, you are in one person's head. So if I am in Sally's head and she is the protagonist, she is the main character of that story, we are learning what her story is, but maybe she has a love interest. If we want to alternate POVs, we could have Sally take all of the odd chapters in her POV, and all the even chapters could be from Jeff's perspective, who is her love interest. Now, you could also do that where, say, chapter 1, we orient the reader at the very opening of that chapter to know that Sally is opening that chapter, but maybe about midway through that chapter, we have a scene break, and then we orient the reader and let the reader know that we are now in Jeff's head. Now, you do that to be able to have that definition between we are in Sally's head in this section and now we are in Jeff's. You don't want to flip back and forth within the same scene if you are going back and forth with your characters, because that can be jarring. And plus, it doesn't give your reader a chance to really know Sally if you keep trying to jump into Jeff's head. Use your dialogue. That's one of the best ways to have your protagonist know exactly what the love interest is thinking, or show body language that shows if Jeff is upset, then what would his body language look like? If Jeff is in love and just is smitten with her, what does that body language look like? What are some things that he could do with his body language to show that? And what are some of the things that he can say verbally? The one thing that we don't want to do is every other paragraph jump back and forth in their heads, because then it's kind of like playing with a yo-yo, and you are dropping your reader into Sally's head and then you're yanking them out before they have a chance to really settle in, and then you're dropping them into Jeff's head. So that is one of the reasons why I say make sure that you stay in one head at a time when you are limited, because that's exactly what limited means. It means that you are limited to that one person's perspective. Cece, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd say I know what you're saying about in the same scene, not having the two different POVs in the same scene. But let's say, for example, we have a fight scene going on, and mid-fight, we want to switch to the other guy's POV, whatever the case may be. I'm assuming that this is going to be a character who goes between his POV and her POV, or the two POVs throughout the book. You're not just jumping for one scene. You can do that in that scene. You should not do that in the same paragraph. You have to make a clear line between this person's POV and that person's POV, switching, even if you're in the middle of a quote unquote scene, like say a fight scene or even a sex scene or anything of that nature.
To Cece's point, one of the things that you have to make sure that you're doing, even if you are in the middle of a scene and you shift to change those POVs, you want to make sure that you're orienting your reader so that your reader doesn't get confused. I know that I've read books before where I think that I'm in Sally's head, and then all of a sudden, about 300 words in, I'm like, whoa, wait, whose head am I in? Because it's not her head. And then I have to go back to the top of that one little scene or section and reread it, because I just discovered that I'm in Jeff's head. So it becomes confusing for your reader. So like what Cece was saying, you want to make sure that you're orienting your reader. There's nothing wrong with ending a scene with right in the middle of some action and having that little bit of a cliffhanger within that scene where you're breaking before you go into your other character's head. But you have to make sure that you're orienting your reader, and you don't want to do it to the point where every other paragraph you are changing POVs, because then that becomes really confusing for your reader.
Hi, Marigold. I see another question in the chat.
So for the exercise, using the character's name would be one way to limit the use of he, she, him, her. I would say that you could use the character's name, but do not rely on that, because then everywhere you have that pronoun, you would put the character's name, and then you would have the same effect. What this exercise does is it pushes you to tighten your manuscript. How can you show the action unfolding without multiple uses of the character's name or pronouns? How can you show that happening in real time? It truly is an exercise where you want to avoid repetitive use of the pronouns. And to your question, the repetitive use of the character's name. How can you show what's happening in real time with descriptive wording?
Plus, if you're
Go
writing
ahead.
in third person, limited or deep POV, you shouldn't use the name that much because it tends to sort of pull the camera out. It almost takes away of that closeness, that deepness that you get from third person limited. So you should try to go with the pronouns, because when you start using words like names that would be narrator type of words, you're killing the deep POV part. You're diluting it.
As an example, think about an action that you do when you first get home and you take that key and you slide the key into the doorknob and you're twisting it and you hear the click of the lock mechanism unlocking. You wouldn't sit there and say, Miracle, here's the click of the lock. Miracle is turning the key further. Miracle feels the spring disengage and the lock open. You wouldn't keep saying the name over and over again because, like Cece was saying, you want that deeper perspective. Rather than saying she turns the key, she can feel this, she can feel that, you want to show that in real time and show what those actions look like. Don't tell the reader, show the reader what that action is. Any other thoughts, questions?
I'm going to mention a couple of things.
Sure.
This is going to be unvarnished facts from a person who makes a living as a writer. Okay, so when it comes to POV, I'd have to say that I don't fall in the camp of, hey, write the POV or the tense you feel comfortable, the one you like. So what do I believe? I believe it's important to research the market and see what the market trends to do, because you want to write essentially what people are reading. You want to write it the way that they're reading it. So how do you do that? How do you look at marketing trends? Well, there's two things you have to keep in mind. First of all, are you going to be traditionally published or are you going to be indie pubbed? If you're going to be indie pubbed, read bestsellers in the indie pub. If you're going to go for an agent or to try to be traditionally published, you need to read books in that. You need to read books that are current bestsellers. Those are the ones that are relevant. Reading a 20 or 30-year-old work will not show you what the market is doing right now, and you want to be doing what the market is doing. So determine what you're going to write, what genre, and how you're going to publish it, and then do your research. Read a bunch of books. So that's how you get that information. Read a lot. Next thing is, when it comes to POV and tense, many people call these rules, but think of them as conventions, which means you don't have to always adhere to them, but veer away at your own risk. And the last thing I would say is third person limited. Don't let that word limited fool you. It doesn't mean it's limiting. What it means, just simply that you are limiting what you can see. So you can't see in every other character's head. So that's also called third person deep. And done correctly, it can be just as powerful as first person, without the off-putting stigma that first person seems to garner in some genres. That's it.
100%. Cece, would you share with us just a little tip on what you do when you are researching for bodies to read in top genres or top 100 in a genre that you're wanting to research?
Sure. So when I decide what genre I'm going to do, and I am indie pub, so I don't bother reading traditional books for research, I will go to the Amazon top 100 bestseller list and look at the ones that are current. I'll snag about 5 of them in the genre that I'm writing in, and I will read them. I also deconstruct them. I look at how they break down their book. How did they handle the scenes? How did they handle the story structure? So that I can mimic that, not the plot. You create your own plot. I personally like to study the story structure, the POV, and the tense. Back when I was a new writer, my writing coach would have me write a chapter from each of the ones that I wanted to read. He would have me copy that so that I could then figure out how they're doing the tense, because I'm not going to write what's comfortable to me, because I'm here to make money. I'm going to write what the market wants, which if that means first person present, by golly, that's what I'll research. That's what I'll do. And that's what I'll publish. Did I answer your question?
Oh, most definitely. And again, picking a POV or a tense, that is something that you as a writer need to make a decision on. What POV is going to tell your story? And to Cece's point, if you are looking to write to market and you want to write something that you feel is going to hit all of those check boxes for that specific genre and what is trending right now in the writing community or writing industry for publication, then definitely go in there and do your research. Now, if you are a hobby writer or you are just writing something for yourself, then yes, write what you're comfortable with. But again, make sure that you're having that conversation with yourself and deciding, what type of a writer are you? Are you a writer who just wants to write because it's a hobby that you have? Or are you a writer who is trying to break into a specific field within the writing industry and you would like to make a career out of it? So again, ask yourself those questions and then look at the story you're wanting to write. And I do want to touch upon one thing as we're closing to what Cece had said, and even something that Amelia had alluded to. You will hear that there are so many rules in writing, and yet you'll be told to follow the rules. And then on the other hand, you'll be told that the only rule is that there are no rules. Well, when it comes to writing, make sure that you understand what your craft entails. Of course, you want to look at syntax, sentence structure, making sure that you're not flipping your tenses back and forth, and that you are staying, if you start out in first person and you're going to write it all the way through in that perspective, then make sure you are being consistent, because consistency is important in the writing industry. Make sure you're consistent so that your readers can feel that you are a reliable writer when you are telling your story. Of course, consistency doesn't mean that you can't have red herrings and that you can't have twists, turns, and reversals in your story. It just means that you want to make sure that your reader knows what to expect of you as a writer.
So, Miracle, I'd actually like to make a comment about what Wordspinner was speaking about a minute ago.
Sure.
As far as appealing to a specific audience goes via point of view, I'd also like to mention that many publishing houses will have a criteria for works they accept, and within that criteria, you may see that they want something that's first person or third person. So if you're also trying to appeal to a publisher, that's something I encourage you try to look at on their website. It's oftentimes below specific editors' information. And in addition, a lot of times if it's a larger publishing house, the criteria that's presented will commonly appeal to specific trends.
Yeah, and to that point, make sure that if you are looking at traditional publishing houses, that you are following their guidelines. And those guidelines could include the number of words you can have in a manuscript. Harlequin, for example, has specific imprints that you can write to, but they want you to write them in a very specific manner, and they want to make sure that you are falling within a specific count. So are there any other questions before we wrap up today's session? If there are no other questions, then I would like to thank you for attending today. And this concludes today's Creative Writing Salon on What's in a POV. Thank you for attending, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for your great advice, Marigold.
And yours and Cece's as well. Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of AI Writers Connection, folks. If you found our content useful, please give us a big thumbs up. We really appreciate your support, and it helps us continue to bring you quality content. Don't forget to tap on the bell icon so you'll get notification every time we upload a new video. We've got a ton of exciting stuff in the works, and you definitely won't want to miss it. If you have any questions or comments about the prompts we discussed today, or if there are specific topics you want us to cover in future episodes, make sure to drop them in the comments section below. We're always on the lookout for great suggestions from our community. And speaking of community, we'd love to invite you to join the AI Writers Connection Discord group. You'll find a supportive community of like-minded individuals there, all sharing their experiences and ideas. Last but not least, if you haven't already, hit the subscription button, join our AI Writers Connection family, and stay up to date with all things related to AI writing. We're all about creating a community where we can learn, grow, and help each other on our AI writing journey. So come aboard. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and until next time, Keep writing and stay inspired.